For many years now, much of my work has been defined by a single question: who were the Old Ones? In this video, I hope to discuss what we know about the Old Ones and what we could know in the future. First, let's focus on who they are. There are a couple things we know about them and their culture. The Old Ones are an ancient race. They are strong followers of Ralos and Ranul. They used Nagan Nil magic. Their language had limited vocabulary, which allowed for multiple interpretations of their writings. And lastly, they are extinct. The Old Ones are an ancient race. Much like other ancient races, like the Tazar, Tacal, and maybe even the Dragonkin, not much is known about their history. The races we do know were brought to Gielinor by gods from other planes through the World Gate, like elves were brought by Saren. In the Prifddinas history book, it says, "It is told that the first elves to come through the World Gate found a world full of beautiful woodlands and terrible beasts." However, these gods didn't bring all the races, since Gielinor was already occupied by beings of its own. Although I couldn't find any proof of this, I suspect that the Old Ones were here from the near beginning. They believe in gods like Ralos and Ranul that seem to be lost from the rest of the world outside of Varlamore. Of these ancient races, we can actually have an in-depth conversation with one of them, the Tacal. The Tacal are proponents of balance, but they don't believe in Guthics. They actually call Guthics a pretender. They believe in a higher power. Of what? We don't know. But they believe in life and death and protecting this cycle. These seem very similar to the teachings of Ralos and Ranul. Ralos is all about life and light, while Ranul is about darkness and death. This could mean the Tacal are actually followers of Ralos and Ranul, just like the Old One. Given that these ancient races both believe in the same deities, it wouldn't be too far of a stretch to say that they both are from similar time. More about the Tacal: they are actually Tazar that left the volcanoes of Karamja long ago when the world burned. They traveled west to Mount Karum. They sought a new purpose, to ensure balance, for without balance, the world burns. So what happened to this ancient race? How come we don't see the Old Ones anymore? Why aren't people outside of Varlamore talking more about them? We're not the only ones asking these questions. Kosande Shah is a botanist who is obsessed with the Old Ones because he aims to find a cure for his deadly disease, corpse syndrome. In the player's pursuit of Kosande in Desert Treasure 2, we learned that the Old Ones were facing extinction for an unknown reason. The Old Ones were desperate to save their race. They attempted a soul transference ritual to escape their dying bodies. However, they failed. In fact, we know of people who performed this ritual successfully, the people of Arceus. The leader of the Arceus house, Lord Trobian, used the Dark Altar to create new vessels to contain their souls, unlocking immortality, with the consequences of not being able to stray too far from the Dark Altar. This was called the Ascent of Arceus. However, Lord Trobian didn't discover this technique himself. He learned it from the Tacal, another connection between the Old Ones and the Tacal. But the Ascent of Arceus happened thousands of years later after the Old One's extinction, which begs the question, how did the Tacal know about soul transference? This is where we have to do a bit of speculation, but I believe there's a connection between the Tacal and the Old Ones. They both seem to have similar beliefs of Ralos and Ranul. They are both ancient beings, and now they both have knowledge of soul transference. Only time will show what the Tacal has in store for the player. In the Old One's attempt to perform soul transference, they used a red plant-like parasite called the Strangler to aid somehow in this ritual. It behaves much like the cordyceps in the Last of Us game/show. It takes over the mind and body of a living being, putting it in a state between life and death, or an undead state. The infected behave like a hive mind, with each infected using each other's senses. Why would the Old Ones use this dangerous parasite as part of their soul transference ritual? while the RCS people never had to use this parasite? That's up for speculation. My best guess is that the Old Ones' method was more crude, since they were the first ones to attempt it. As for the reason why they needed to use it, the Strangler puts the living being in a state of life and death, the state between Ralos and Ranul. They were attempting to cheat or defy their god's natural concepts in order to remove their soul from their god cycle. We'll wait to see if we get more information about this topic. One similarity between the Old Ones and the RCS method is the use of the Dark Altar. While we know RCS used the Dark Altar magic to create the spectral vessels for the ritual, the information about the Old Ones is a bit more vague. In the Stranglewood, there are notes called the Tatty Pages. These are written by a member serving under the Zamorakian leader Vardorvis during the God Wars. In these pages, the person speaks of a Zamorakian presence in the Stranglewood, and that the Zamorakians played a role in the extinction of the Old Ones. This is strange because the Old Ones were not followers of Zamorak, so how was he involved in their ritual? During the God Wars, there was one Zamorakian follower, ex-follower in Zaya, and it was the demon Skotizo. Skotizo stole the Dark Altar artifact from a Karamjian temple and betrayed his god Zamorak. He fled to Zaya, taking the Dark Altar with him, and used it to create the Catacombs of Kurend. This Zamorak presence that is described in the Tatty Pages could come from the Dark Altar, since Skotizo was using it. But maybe Skotizo himself was helping the Old Ones with their ritual. So how did the Old Ones' ritual fail? We actually have their own documentation during this time in the form of a stone tablet during the Garden of Death quest. We learn a lot about the language of the Old Ones during the quest. The language seems to be very limiting in its vocabulary and grammatical structure. Kasande points out in his dirty notes that the words can have multiple meanings. The same word can mean sea or river depending on context clues of the sentence. This makes interpreting their language varied and difficult. The player uses the word that they learn to decipher the stone tablets. There are 4 in total, which seem to describe the events that are happening during the soul transference ritual. The first tablet talks about how they don't have much time until their extinction, but they were able to create a vessel to house their soul, which I assume they did this in the same way that Arceus did with the Dark Altar to create the spectral bodies. They bring the vessel to a second location, where the second tablet is found. This is where things get a little bit more confusing. I'm interpreting it as there are a lot of beings or bodies that need to live. They need to put their bodies inside the new soul vessels. However, they need to know how to do this transfer method, suggesting the player to go to the next garden in the west. The next tablet talks about how they succeed in the soul transference. However, they need the Strangler or death poison to reanimate it. The last tablet says that the Strangler failed and destroyed their home, Zat Tal. I'm assuming Zat Tal was the city that used to occupy the Stranglewoods, where they brought the Strangler to, thus expediting their extinction. An interesting thought, though, is that the Strangler is supposed to essentially make zombies. How come there are no strangled old ones running around the Stranglewood? Where are the bodies? That's something we're gonna have to wait for more information. Now that we have found what happened to the Old Ones, I want to focus more on their culture. Kasande noted that the Lizardmen had similar architecture to the Old Ones' ruins, and he makes a connection that the Lizardmen took this style from the Old Ones. Walking through the gardens of the Old Ones' ruins, they do seem strikingly similar to the Lizardmen structures. The Old Ones use these large greenish stones to form walls, steps, and tile. Even the Old Ones' furniture and pots seem to use the same stone. You can also notice these bow tie symbols in the walls. Something else to note is these pillars with a strange symbol on top when you examine the pillar. It sort of looks like a head with ears. While in the Lizardman Shaman dungeon, you'll find the bow tie symbol again. alongside with these same greenish stones for the walls and tiles. However, there are differences. The lizardmen have symbols of Zarek and statues of the Great Olm in their structures, while missing the head with ears pillar in the Old One ruins. We can speculate that the lizardmen adopted the bow tie symbol, but they replaced the head with ears pillar with the Great Olm. However, we know of more Old One ruins. In Varlamore, the Strangled, and the Perilous Moon dungeon. On top of the surface of Varlamore, north of the map, there seems to be a similar structure as the ruins of Mora, where one of the Gardens of Death reside. It uses the same bow tie symbol and head with ears pillar, using the same greenish stone. In the Stranglewoods, the ruins also have the bow tie symbol and similar design, but it uses a reddish-brownish stone. However, there are more strange symbols scattered in the area. There is this twisty one, the horned one, the eye one, and the person one, while missing the head with ears symbol. I'm not sure why the head with ears symbol isn't here, but the symbols seem to be important enough to be placed in the garden and in the area north of Varlamore. Perhaps the symbol represents a garden or a place of harvest. The other four symbols seem to be pretty integral to the area of Stranglewood. There are these statues scattered throughout the area. In fact, there are large monuments of these four symbols at the ritual site where Vardovis resides. There seems to be no distinguishing trait other than their designs for these four symbols. There are new symbols along the trims of the wall in the Stranglewoods as well. There are these spirals at the top, zigzags in the middle, and shields at the bottom of the wall. With all these new symbols and designs that are detailed and carved throughout the area, gives a sense of style and design. It makes this area seem significant and important. That's why I think Zat Tal is actually the name of this ruin. It was the Old One's main or capital city. The last area we know was built by the Old Ones is the Perilous Moons. The Perilous Moon area is made up of a gray stone that has these zigzag patterns detailing the bottom of the walls, very similar to the zigzags in the walls of Zat Tal. There are statues of eagles to the eclipse moon side, statues of serpents to the blue moon side, and statues of jaguars to the blood moon side. These statues seem to represent each of the moon animal counterparts. You can tell this by looking at the armor set, each having the represented animal on the gear. However, this area doesn't bring much info about the Old One's architecture. What it brings is their magic, Nagan Nil. Nata describes it as a type of magic that we have forgotten, where Ayatollah describes it as a magic of nature. The Old Ones use this magic to summon spectral creatures called Nagwa, but there are many other uses that we don't know. The dwarves of Kamtorum seem to be experts of Nagan Nil, but they don't know what Nagwas are. During the Perilous Moon quest, the guard and Atala seem to call the Sulphur Nagwa as one of those creatures, which is weird because the historians of the Grand Museum seem to know Nagwas came from Nagan Nil. Maybe I'm reading the dwarves incorrectly, but how do they know Nagan Nil and not know how to summon Nagwas? Regardless, the Old Ones use nature and design in order to use Nagan Nil. Ayatollah uses the nature in the Perilous Moons to use their magic to seal the Moons of Peril. Talking about the architecture and their designs could be key to how they use Nagan Nil. The last things I want to discuss is their language and drawings. Their drawings can be found in the wood carvings during the Garden of Death quest. They seem to provide simple instructions or generic images with their language next to each thing. I went ahead and put the translated words next to each of the images. There are a couple points we can learn about their culture by looking at these pictures. They had knowledge of gardening and potting. They knew how to navigate with a compass. They knew how to poison pests for their crops, and how to introduce helpful organisms to their plants. They knew about pottery and ceramics. They had ink for writing. They buried their dead and placed them in tombs. And they had knowledge of ruins. These all add up to what seems to be a simple or early civilization. In all these pictures, though, something strange is in the geography pictures we have. The first one seems to be of Lake Mulch, but the streams of the picture are coming from the southwest and northeast sides. If we look at Lake Mulch now, the streams are going south and northwest. I might be being nitpicky, but maybe this image of a lake with an island in the middle might be something else. Or maybe the streams changed over thousands of years. The other geography picture has the sea or ocean on the west that is fed by a river coming from the mountains. Again, I'm not too sure where these mountains are supposed to be represented. These aren't exactly accurate, but it could be representing the Custodian Mountains that separate Varlamore from Current. The Old One's drawings can be found elsewhere other than the wood carvings. Another place where it is very prominent is in the Perilous Moon First Chamber. There are murals of the Eclipse Moon, Blue Moon, and Blood Moon, each performing impressively large amounts of catastrophe. The Eclipse Moon is eating the sun. The Blue Moon is splitting the mountain in half. The Blood Moon is causing it to rain blood. Ayatollah says the moons of peril were summoned to wreak havoc. Their summoner faced inevitable death, and decided to lash out and inflict death on others. This sounds very familiar with the thing that was causing the Old One's extinction. Could this summoner be an Old One? Just like their pictures, their language can be confusing as well. As we seen earlier, their language is limited in vocabulary. We have meaning of each word from the Garden of Death quest, but since the release of Varlamore, we have learned more words. Ralos and Ranul obviously derive from the words Rallo and Rani, which both mean light and dark respectively. Neopotzil is the area of the Perilous Moons, and it is a prison, or might mean prison itself. I don't think any of the words we currently know are roots of this word. Ayatollah says some words when we first encounter them. They say, Uwat Zeta Chemo, Uwat Iknil, which translates to something arrive yes. We don't know what the other phrase that they are saying, but Iknil seems to be a reference to the character or a friend. They say more interesting and confusing things during the Perilous Moon quest. After Zuma rearranges the ruins on the floating D20, Ayatollah mentions, for it to have moved, that means the seals needed reshaping. This has not happened in decades. Decades? Wasn't this just discovered in Camtorum? Does this mean someone else has come relatively recently? Again, more things to speculate. I want to also mention that there is another group that seems to be a part of the Old One's language, the Talkotsi. This was one of the original groups that colonized Varlamore. They were the ones that brought and practiced the faith of Ralos and Ranul to the region. You can see the Old One's influence in the name of the city, Tal Teklan. Tal meaning life or soul, while Teklan seems to resemble the word Talain, which can mean forest. Given that they named the rainforest Talati Rainforest, it wouldn't be that much of a stretch that they were inspired by the Old One's language. We don't know many Talkotsi words, but there's another name that originates from these people, Arkan. The current queen of Varlamore's name is descendant from the Talkotsi people. While none of the Old One's words seem to match Arkan, it might be good to keep an eye out for something that sounds similar. I've been saving the final word we know in the Old One's language for last. Exuma. Metzil, the Teokan, or High Priest of Ranul, says during the Twilight Promise quest, "The word is a gift to us, those who walked these lands before we did. They knew the truths of this world, in a way we can only dream of. We call them the Old Ones. They understood the importance of passing their knowledge. So much of what we know comes from them. Our world endures in a way we can't comprehend, but like all things, it will not do so forever. Its light will one day die, but this is not something to be feared. It is something to be embraced. You see, we are part of a cycle, something far larger than ourselves. When the time comes, Ralos and Ranul will come together as one, consuming these lands in holy fire, until there is nothing left but ash. But even in ash, embers remain. From those embers, a new world will be born, and the cycle will continue once more. This is Exuma." The Tacal said, "Our purpose was to wait, but we saw the world burn. We could not stand by and watch, so we left our people, left our home, and took a new purpose. For every death, there must be life. For every life, there must be death. Perfectly balanced, as all things should be. We serve this balance, for without balance, the world burns."